Chapter 8, Snozcumbers. But if you don't eat people like all the others, Sophie said, then what do you live on? That is a squelching, tricky problem around here, the BFG answered. In this slosh-flunking giant country, happy eats like pineapples and pigwinkles is simply not growing. Nothing is growing except for one extremely icky-poo vegetable. It is called the snozcumber. The snozcumber? Cried Sophie. There's no such thing. The BFG looked at Sophie and smiled, showing about 20 of his square white teeth. Yesterday, he said, we was not believing in giants, was we? Today, we is not believing in snozcumbers. Just because we happen not to have actually seen something with our own two little winkles, we think it is not existing. What about, for instance, the great swizzly Scotch hopper? I beg your pardon, Sophie said. And the humplecrimp? What's that? Sophie said. And the rap rascal? The what? Sophie said. And the crumpscottle? Are they animals? Sophie asked. They is common animals, said the BFG contemptuously. I is not a very know-all giant myself, but it seems to me that you is an absolutely know-nothing human being. Your brain is full of rotten wool. You mean cotton wool, Sophie said. What I mean and what I say is two different things, the BFG announced rather grandly. I will now show you a snozcumber. The BFG flung open a massive cupboard and took out the weirdest-looking thing Sophie had ever seen. It was about half as long again as an ordinary man, but was much thicker. It was as thick around its girth as a perambulator. It was black with white stripes along its length, and it was covered all over with coarse knobbles. Here is the repulsing snozcumber, cried the BFG, waving it about. I squabble it! I mispise it! I desponge it! But because I is refusing to gobble up human beings like the other giants, I must spend my life guzzling up icky-poo snozcumbers instead. If I don't, I will be nothing but skin and groans. You mean skin and bones, Sophie said. I know it is bones, the BFG said, but please understand that I cannot be helping it if I sometimes is saying things a little squickly. I is trying my very best all the time. The big friendly giant looked suddenly so forlorn that Sophie got quite upset. I'm sorry, she said. I didn't mean to be rude. There never was any schools to teach me talking in giant country, the BFG said sadly. But couldn't your mother have taught you? Sophie asked. My mother? Cried the BFG. Giants don't have mothers. Surely you is knowing that. I did not know that, Sophie said. Who ever heard of a woman giant? Shouted the BFG, waving the snozcumber around his head like a lasso. There never was a woman giant, and there never will be one. Giants is always men. Sophie felt herself getting a little muddled. In that case, she said, how are you born? Giants isn't born, the BFG answered. Giants appears, and that's all there is to it. They simply appears, the same way as the sun and the stars. And when did you appear? Sophie asked. Now, how on earth could I be knowing a thing like that? Said the BFG. It was so long ago I couldn't count. You mean you don't even know how old you are? No giant is knowing that, the BFG said. All I is knowing about myself is that I is very old, very, very old, and crumply, perhaps as old as the earth. What happens when a giant dies? Sophie asked. Giants is never dying, the BFG answered. Sometimes, and quite suddenly, a giant is disappearing and nobody is ever knowing where he goes to. But mostly us giants is simply going on and on like whiffsy time twiddlers. The BFG was still holding the awesome snozcumber in his right hand, and now he put one end into his mouth and bit off a huge hunk of it. He started crunching it up, and the noise he made was like the crunching of lumps of ice. It's filthing, he spluttered, speaking with his mouth full and spraying large pieces of snozcumber like bullets in Sophie's direction. Sophie hopped around on the tabletop, ducking out of the way. It's disgusterous, the BFG gurgled. It's sickable, it's rotsome, it's maggot-wise. Try it yourself, this foulsome snozcumber. No, thank you, Sophie said, backing away. It's all you're going to be guzzling around here from now on, so you might as well get used to it, said the BFG. Go on, you snipsy little winkle. Have a go. Sophie took a small nibble. Ugh! She spluttered. Oh no! Oh gosh! Oh help! She spat it out quickly. It tastes of frog skins, she gasped, and rotten fish. Worse than that, cried the BFG, roaring with laughter. To me, it is tasting of clock coaches and slime wanglers. Do we really have to eat it? Sophie said. You do, unless you was wanting to become so thin you will be disappearing into a thick ear. Into thin air, Sophie said. A thick ear is something quite different. Once again, that sad, winsome look came into the BFG's eyes. Words, he said, is oh such a twitch-tickling problem to me all my life. So you must simply try to be patient and stop squibbling. As I am telling you before, I know exactly what words I am wanting to say, but somehow or other they is always getting squiddled around. That happens to everyone, Sophie said. Not like it happens to me, the BFG said. I is speaking the most terrible Wigglish. I think you speak beautifully, Sophie said. You do? Cried the BFG, suddenly brightening. You really do? Simply beautifully, Sophie repeated. Well, that is the nicest present anybody has ever given me in my whole life, cried the BFG. Are you sure you was not twiddling my leg? Of course not, Sophie said. I just love the way you talk. How wondercrump! Cried the BFG, still beaming. How whoopsie splunkers! How absolutely squiffling! I is all of a stutter. Listen, Sophie said. We don't have to eat snozcumbers. In the fields around our village, there are all sorts of lovely vegetables like cauliflowers and carrots. Why don't you get some of those next time you go visiting? The BFG raised his great head proudly in the air. I is a very honorable giant, he said. I would rather be chewing up rotsome snozcumbers than snitching things from other people. You stole me, Sophie said. I did not steal you very much, said the BFG, smiling gently. After all, you was only a tiny little girl. Chapter 9. The Blood Bottler. Suddenly, a tremendous thumping noise came from outside the cave entrance, and a voice like thunder shouted, Runt! Is you there, Runt? I is hearing you jabbling. Who is you jabbling to, Runt? Look out! Cried the BFG. It's a blood bottler! But before he had finished speaking, the stone was rolled aside, and a 50-foot giant, more than twice as tall and wide as the BFG, came striding into the cave. He was naked except for a dirty little piece of cloth around his bottom. Sophie was on the tabletop. The enormous, partly eaten snozcumber was lying near her. She ducked behind it. The creature came clumping into the cave and stood towering over the BFG. Who was you jabbling to in here just now? He boomed. I was jabbling to myself, the BFG answered. Piffle-fizz, shouted the blood bottler. Bug swallop, he boomed. You was talking to a human being. That's what I is thinking. No, no, cried the BFG. Yus, yus, boomed the blood bottler. I is guessing you has snitched away a human being and brought it to your bunghole as a pet. So now I is winkling out and guzzling it as extra snacks before my supper. The poor BFG was very nervous. There's no one in here, he stammered. Why don't you leave me alone? The blood bottler pointed a finger as large as a tree trunk at the BFG. Runty little scum-screwer, he shouted. Piffling little swish-figgler, squimpy little bottle-wart, prunty little pog-swizzler. I is now going to search the primroses. He grabbed the BFG by the arm. And you is going to help me do it. Us together is going to winkle out this tasteful little human being, he shouted. The BFG had intended to whisk Sophie off the table as soon as he got the chance and hide her behind his back, but now there was no hope of doing this. Sophie peered around the chewed-off end of the enormous Snozcumber, watching the two giants as they moved away down the cave. The blood bottler was a gruesome sight. His skin was reddish-brown. There was black hair sprouting on his chest and arms and on his stomach. The hair on his head was long and dark and tangled. His foul face was round and squashy-looking. The eyes were tiny black holes. The nose was small and flat, but the mouth was large. It spread right across the face, almost ear to ear, and it had lips that were like two giant purple frankfurters lying one on top of the other. Craggy yellow teeth stuck out between the two purple frankfurter lips, and rivers of spit ran down over the chin. It was not in the least difficult to believe that this ghastly brood ate men, women, and children every night. The blood bottler, still holding the BFG by the arm, was examining the rows and rows of bottles. "You and your pibbling bottles!" he shouted. "What is you putting in them?" "Nothing that would interest you," the BFG answered. "You is only interested in guzzling human beings." "And you is dotty as a dog, Swoggler," cried the blood bottler. Soon the blood bottler would be coming back, Sophie told herself, and he was bound to search the tabletop. But she couldn't possibly jump off the table. It was 12 feet high. She'd break a leg. The Snozcumber, although it was as thick as a perambulator, was not going to hide her if the blood bottler picked it up. She examined the chewed-off end. It had large seeds in the middle, each one as big as a melon. They were embedded in soft, slimy stuff. Taking care to stay out of sight, Sophie reached forward and scooped away half a dozen of these seeds. This left a hole in the middle of the Snozcumber large enough for her to crouch in, so long as she rolled herself up into a ball. She crawled into it. It was a wet and slimy hiding place, but what did that matter if it was going to save her from being eaten? The blood bottler and the BFG were coming back towards the table now. The BFG was nearly fainting with fear. Any moment, he was telling himself, Sophie would be discovered and eaten. Suddenly, the blood bottler grabbed the half-eaten Snozcumber. The BFG stared at the bare table. "Sophie, where is you?" he thought desperately. "You cannot possibly be jumping off that high table. So where is you hiding, Sophie?" "So this is the filthy and rotsome glubbage you is eating," boomed the blood bottler, holding up the partly eaten Snozcumber. "You must be cockles to be guzzling such rub squash." For a moment, the blood bottler seemed to have forgotten about his search for Sophie. The BFG decided to lead him further off the track. "That is a scrumdiddlyumptious Snozcumber," he said. "I is guzzling it gleefully every night and day. Is you never trying a Snozcumber, blood bottler?" "Human beings is juicier," the blood bottler said. "You is talking rummy-tot," the BFG said, growing braver by the second. He was thinking that if only he could get the blood bottler to take one bite of the repulsive vegetable, the sheer foulness of its flavor would send him bellowing out of the cave. "I is happy to let you sample it," the BFG went on. "But please, when you see how truly glumptious it is, do not be guzzling the whole thing. Leave me a little snitchet for my supper." The blood bottler stared suspiciously with small piggy eyes at the Snozcumber. Sophie, crouching inside the chewed-off end, began to tremble all over. "You is not switch-fiddling me, is you?" said the blood bottler. "Never!" cried the BFG passionately. "Take a bite, and I am positive you will be shouting out, 'Oh, how scrumdiddlyumptious this wonder veg is!'" The BFG could see the greedy blood bottler's mouth beginning to water more than ever at the prospect of extra food. "Vegetables is very good for you," he went on. "It is not healthsome always to be eating meaty things." "Just this once," the blood bottler said. "I is going to taste these rotsome eats of yours, but I is warning you that if it is filthsome, I is smashing it over your sludgy little head." He picked up the Snozcumber. He began raising it on its long journey to his mouth, some 50 feet up in the air.